Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Happy Tuesday, everybody. We begin, as we usually do, with the economy, and we start with our ongoing coverage of China's stock market woes. More recent bad news on the economy, including the macro data which we examined in yesterday's video, is adding further pressure on equities after a combination of weak economy, modest earnings, and growing geopolitical tensions has led to a months-long slump since May. The Hang Seng China Enterprises Index has dropped 13% from the high in May. The CSI 300 index, a benchmark for onshore equities, fell to its lowest level since early 2019 last week and is headed for an unprecedented fourth yearly loss. Gary Dugan, Chief Executive Officer of the Global CIO Office, speaking to US-based Bloomberg, expressed, quote, "The fear is that the authorities are losing control of the economy and they won't admit it. The market looks set to go significantly lower in levels in the absence of real, substantial new policies." End quote. We have seen a massive exodus from the nation's equity markets. In all, some $6.8 trillion has been wiped out from the market value of Chinese and Hong Kong stocks since a peak recorded in 2021. Although, as we saw yesterday, this is dwarfed by the almost $18 trillion of vanished household wealth over the last 3 years from the property downturn. As UK-based The Financial Times explains this week, quote, "Earlier this year, the received wisdom was that China's problem was housing. A real estate building bubble burst, leaving behind enormous overcapacity and lots of overly indebted property developers, and denting household wealth in the process. That was grim for people caught in the middle of it. But investors generally believed it would pass as soon as the state managed to inject confidence back into the sector. But this confidence has proven elusive." End quote. Research house T.S. Lombard wrote this week, quote, "Sentiment among Chinese investors is extremely pessimistic." End quote. And Vincent Mortier, Group Chief Investment Officer at Europe's largest asset manager Amundi, explained in an interview last week, quote, "The investment case to buy China is totally dead. No one is interested in buying Chinese assets. I have never seen such a big pushback among all our clients." End quote. Next up, last week we covered the new EU Chamber of Commerce and China business report, which demonstrated deep pessimism within that community. Since then, we have seen the release of the American Chamber of Commerce and Shanghai Annual China Business Report too, and sentiment in this report is even worse. According to the survey in the report, only 47% of US firms were optimistic about their 5-year China business outlook, a drop of 5 percentage points versus last year. This is the weakest level of optimism reported since the AmCham Shanghai Annual China Business Report was introduced in 1999. AmCham Shanghai Chairman Alan Gabor said the trend in falling profitability was due to a combination of factors. Quote, "It's domestic demand, it's deflation, and of course we can't ignore the membership's perceptions and concerns about geopolitics." End quote. As we can see, this almost mirrors exactly the concerns of investors leaving Chinese equities, which we just covered. 306 US firms over a range of industries operating in China were polled for the survey. Let's move through some of the findings, which I'm now quoting from the report. Exactly half of respondents saw higher revenue in 2023 than 2022, with the highest rate for the retail sector and lowest for the manufacturing sector. Revenue expectations for this year are cheerier, with 54% of members expecting revenue to rise over last year, though only 37% expect China revenue growth to outpace global growth in the next 3 to 5 years. Operating margins rose for 40% of companies in 2023, a slight improvement from last year's survey results of 37%. 66% of respondents were profitable in 2023, while 17% reported losses. The former metric was a record low, while the latter was on par with 2022. 47% of respondents are optimistic about the 5-year business outlook in China, while 13% of respondents rank China as their headquarters top investment destination. Both rates are the lowest in our survey's history. A higher rate of members this year noted improvements in government policies and regulations toward foreign companies and more transparency in the regulatory environment. Meanwhile, nearly 1/3 said that China's enforcement of IP rights has improved in the last year. Members identified the US-China relationship or geopolitical tensions more broadly as the biggest challenge to their China operations.
the biggest challenge to China's economic growth, and, if improved, the factor that would most benefit their industry. Over two-thirds of companies are following a de-risking strategy, with 36% investing in supply chain resilience and 25% segregating China and non-China data and information. A record high of 25% cut investment in China last year, but only 20% expect to do so this year. The top reason for members decreasing investment is concerns over China's slowing growth. Only 22% of respondents express confidence in the Chinese government's commitment to further opening up their industry in the near future. The chair of AmCham Shanghai expressed with the report, quote, "This year's data indicates that while many positive policies have been announced, they have yet to fully restore confidence among private businesses or consumers in general." End quote. Eric Zheng, president of AmCham Shanghai, expressed, quote, "Though foreign companies face increasing economic headwinds and fierce competition, staying in China is crucial for them to remain globally competitive. The large amount of potential investment waiting at the door, hinging on further market reform, is testament to foreign firms' dedication to this market." End quote. But then, echoing what the European Union Chamber of Commerce in China leadership expressed last week, Zheng further observed, quote, "The risk of doing business in China has gone up in the past few years, and at the same time, the market is slowing down." End quote. Now, this brings us nicely to our next development to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, I have one big favor to ask. That is just to hit the like button, and if you have not done so already, subscribe and hit the bell notification. This will mean you're on top of this analysis as it's released. It's also tremendous help for the algorithm, meaning this channel can grow and be shown to new people. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep the channel financially sustainable, and if you know someone who might enjoy this sort of content, sharing is a big help too. Thank you so much, everyone, for the amazing ongoing support. Next up, Hong Kong-based South China Morning Post reports, citing unnamed senior EU sources, that Germany and China are, quote, actively working to convince European Union members to oppose electric vehicle tariffs during a vote next week, end quote. The vote is scheduled for the 25th of September, and the PRC Minister of Commerce is in Europe this week. With this news, some commentators are asking, is Germany coordinating its messaging with the PRC? If so, this would be a stunning development, one which would likely shock many Europeans. The South China Morning Post reports that Berlin has been phoning other capitals in a late bid to get them to oppose the duties during the vote. Germany's motivations are clear. Its powerful auto industry is very vulnerable. On Monday, yesterday, China's State Administration for Market Regulation warned companies, including BMW, Mercedes-Benz and Volkswagen, about antitrust risks after complaints from China's domestic industry. Also on Monday, the European Commission said that the deadline for Chinese electric vehicle makers to make price commitments as a way of averting tariffs had passed, with no possibility to reverse their offers after they were all rejected. Same day too, Italy officially backed the tariffs proposed by the European Commission, with the Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani saying in an interview, quote, "We support the duties that the EU Commission proposes to protect the competitiveness of our companies," end quote. And finally for today, we move to the South China Sea, where China may have scored a small win against US ally the Philippines in the ongoing dangerous tensions in the region. We learned in recent days that the Philippines withdrew its Teresa Magbanua Coast Guard vessel from the Sabina Shoal, citing dwindling supplies and 6 sailors. Manila's withdrawal follows bilateral diplomatic consultations with China on the dispute on Thursday, but a senior Philippine official said the ship's return to port was not part of a compromise with Beijing. Philippine government officials said that they would send the ship back after repairs from the recent PRC ramming. However, as regular viewers will appreciate, it's likely that the PRC will employ a blockade to prevent this from happening. Indeed, Beijing may use the opportunity to take full control of the shoal within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. Why did the ship leave? The Coast Guard spokesman explained that because of, quote, harassment by Chinese ships at Sabina Shoal, end quote, Philippine crew had to ration their food supply and eat rice porridge for weeks, adding, quote, "We did not surrender the Sabina Shoal. It's wrong to say we surrendered it," end quote. And in a separate statement, quote, "We will sustain presence over these waters," end quote. Meanwhile, Chinese state media is taking a victory lap with the news. State-run Global Times, citing Xie Chen, a research fellow at Shanghai Institute for International Studies, as expressing, quote, "If the Philippines tries to package the ship's withdrawal as a victory after completing its so-called mission, it would be absurd. The August 28 airdrop supplies were clearly insufficient, and the ship's withdrawal was more likely an act of desperation as its supplies ran low." End quote. In a special commentary, state-run Xinhua wrote yesterday, quote, "The Philippine side should learn from recent events and carefully consider its next steps. Given that Manila often chops and changes in tackling differences with China in the South China Sea, both its words and actions necessitate close observation and preventative measures." End quote. For those new to following this dispute, a quick primer: the Philippines wants to control Sabina Shoal, an unoccupied atoll inside its exclusive economic zone. The shoal, which lies just 86 miles west of the Philippine province of Palawan and over 600 miles from China, is near an area rich in oil deposits and en route Manila considers crucial for trade and security. However, despite the vast disparity in distance from the shoal to the two respected claimants, the shoal is part of China's vast claims to the entire South China Sea. As J. Batongbako, a maritime security expert at the University of the Philippines, explained to US-based The New York Times this week, quote, "A hostile China would be able to strangle our maritime trade with the rest of Asia and most of the world from Sabina Shoal. It would make a good staging ground for vessels that will interfere with Philippine maritime activities." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.